Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom. Today is Monday, February 25th, 2019. With me today on our podcast, I have American Man and Conjecture. And today we're going to talk about AOC, everyone's favorite representative from New York, Ocasio-Cortez. And today we have several things we want to cover, but I want to start with this article right here. Ocasio-Cortez, people maybe shouldn't reproduce due to climate change. Is it okay to have children? She says people are asking her. Well, I'd like to start with that because I think that she's going basically down a very, very dark path here if she's literally suggesting that people are the problem for climate change. And I've talked about this in a podcast about her about 4 days ago, 5 days ago. But I do think it's a very, very dark path, and she is apparently very popular. She's a darling of the media, and for her to go around and say stuff like this is probably very, very embarrassing for the Democratic Party. However, she did actually say there is a scientific consensus that life will be hard for kids in the future because of climate change. And I'd like to, basically go now into what she has proposed and is often called now the Green New Deal. And I'd like to start with Conjecture if I could. Conjecture, can you give me a big picture of what the Green New Deal is?
What are you meaning precisely?
What is this exactly? What is this proposal? What does it encompass? And what does it cost?
Well, eminent domain, correct? They want to expand that so the government can just take anyone's property whenever they want, so that they may rebuild the structures on their property for increased environmental efficiency and return it as the government sees fit. And to top things off, the bill also wants to dramatically expand the size of government to the point where it will be running a $6 trillion deficit per year, at least roughly around 6 trillion. I believe the estimates you have posted here are between 4 and 12 trillion per year.
Actually, I'm pulling up a Bloomberg article right now where it says it could be anywhere between 51 and 93 trillion dollars to execute the plan as proposed. And first of all, let me say, Conjecture, thank you for that information. But it sounds to me like the Green New Deal is in violation of the Constitution on many on many levels. Do you have any thoughts on that?
When has the government obeyed the Constitution and
Yep. Hey, American Man, you with us?
Oh, I'm here, buddy. I'm
Gotcha.
here.
What are your thoughts on this? And also, I'd like to ask both of you, because I don't know, and I admit when I'm ignorant. I don't know who wrote this bill. Do any of you guys know who wrote this bill, this new Green Deal?
Off the top of my head, no, I'd be lying if I said yeah. But what I do know about this bill is it's very relevant to what they're doing here in the state of California, where I live. And it's all about climate control or climate change or whatever they want to call it. Basically, what it is, it's people control and people change. But
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
I agree. This seems to me like a George Soros dream of
oh
a.
yeah,
It almost seems like it's communist. I mean, I hate to throw these titles around, but
right.
it seems to me it's communist because first of all, property rights get violated, and that's one of the tenets of communism. Um, but not only that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Between 51 and 93 trillion dollars. I mean, aren't they going to have to raise taxes just a little bit for that? You think?
You were kind of breaking up there a little bit, TC. Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah. I was just saying that it seems to me that this is more of a communist plan. It goes beyond socialism, in my mind, into straight communism. Not only does it trample on the people's rights, but the taxation levels would be so high, so devastatingly high. Um, uh, Basically, people would be in debt servitude for approximately 2 centuries, maybe three, in order to fund this. That's my best guess, based on our current economic policy anyway.
Yeah, you're breaking up again. Well, my take on this whole situation is simply this: that the government is trying to use any excuse they can come up with to and print more money so they can totally destroy the American dollar. And I believe there's a reason for that. And I think the reason for that is so they'll have an excuse to switch us over to electronic currency, so it's better to control the population.
Do you think it's possible that a bill like this, that is so incredibly expensive, is so over encompassing? It's literally it tramples on freedom so readily that the point of this bill is to first float this one and then come down with one that's tamed down later, that people will go, oh well, at least it's not as bad as the original one. That only partially tramples on their rights and only partially taxes the urine out of them. Do you think that might be what it is?
Again, you're having a problem. I think you're breaking up, so I couldn't hear anything that you said.
Okay, I apologize. Let me take a look at this real quick. Yep,
All right.
I'm in the red. I'm in the green now. Um, yeah, I think that this might be. There we go. That's all I could do, guys. Hopefully, you guys can hear me now. There is nothing
Yeah, I can
really.
hear you.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to repeat myself a third time on the podcast, but basically, it seems to me that this thing is just so incredibly huge, so incredibly encompassing, so it just in its nature, even in the taxation side of things, which people have to look at. And 51 to
Definitely.
93 trillion dollars. It really seems to me that this is a trial balloon. Throw this
Yeah.
big, huge plan that's far too big and expensive to ever even think about implementing, to put in a plan that's maybe one half or one third this size, but still tramples on your
Yeah.
rights, and it still taxes
Definitely.
you to the point of, you know, not not being able to do anything anymore. Plus, not to mention how much money they'll have to print in order to actually, implement this, which would literally throw the entire world into hyperinflation. Um,
Exactly.
It wouldn't throw the entire world into a hyperinflation.
93
The rest of the
trillion
world
printed from the Federal
would
Reserve.
unpin themselves from the US dollar if we started going hyperinflationary.
Yeah, I don't know. I would think that, with the corporatism being shown on the Democrat side, that they'd probably import an enormous amount of labor for this, and a lot of that money would go home from where that imported labor came from. I think there would probably be quite a bit of that.
Well, we all know one thing's for sure. This is so they can have an excuse to get the most cheapest labor out of the American people, because this just isn't going to be happening here. This is going to be happening all over the world. And this is for a purpose. That is the purpose to form a one world government, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. I mean, these goals are so lofty. I don't think they're actually achievable. For instance,
Well,
one of the measures here is to eliminate carbon emissions from all power and transportation sectors. Period.
right.
All of it.
Like in, like in California, they've outlawed all petroleum fuels, whether it be gasoline or diesel. They've outlawed coal. The only energy they're saying is reusable is solar electricity. And we all know that that's not true. And the only vehicles you're going to be able to drive in California eventually by 2040, maybe sooner, will be electric cars. Well, but the problem is when you convert every home and every vehicle over to just electricity, the price of electricity is going to quadruple.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
So,
The one of the backers, talked about the cost of inaction would be more expensive because the cost of quote unquote catastrophic climate change could cost more than 500 billion annually.
Do you mind if I interject on that?
Absolutely, Conjecture. Come on in.
If you've ever listened to Bob Murphy, he's gone through the official UN reports and found that worst case scenario by the UN's own projections, climate change in 100 years from now would cost only a few percent of GDP, and that we would be so much richer by that point in time that the actual cost would be relatively next to nothing, considering all of the technological advances that we'd have to be able to deal with everything else that came up.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that makes sense to me. However, I'm going to throw something else out there. One has to be a believer that man is the cause of climate change, for this
Right.
to even, become an issue. And I'm not 100% sure that everyone believes that, even though Ocasio-Cortez herself is saying that there's a scientific consensus that basically the lives will be very difficult for the younger generations going forward because of man's addiction to fossil fuels. I completely disagree with that. I don't think that that's as anywhere near as much of an issue as she would say. But the this is why I'm trying to bring this up here. I want to give credit to one of our members in our chat, Chaos Craig, who actually threw in a wonderful thought into the chat about 2 nights ago. And that was when we were talking about, are the Democrats socialist, quasi-communist? Is there fascism there? And what he had talked about was the corporatism, that Democrats are corporatist. So if you don't mind, guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about this Cortez woman along these lines, because the Democrats have been actors on a stage for many, many years, placating, their constituents with quasi-socialist idealism, and part of this is welfare, basically scaring everyone, saying that the Republicans will take away their Social Security if they get elected. They've been playing that card for many election cycles. It's never happened,
Yep.
but they always claim it. Medicare itself saw reductions under Obamacare, which was done under Obama, but you didn't see the media decrying the fact that a Democrat had actually put plans in place. It was under his
Do you mind if I
watch.
interject?
Let me finish my thought real quick, Conjecture, and then I'll let you come in. So basically, the corporatist Democrats, which is what they are, I mean, they play a role, but they're definitely corporatists, are scared to death of these real-life socialists that are products of the U.S. education system, the brainwashing, the media brainwashing, the public school education brainwashing, where they actually believe this stuff. Now, the Democrats pretend to believe it, but there are new people coming into power now that actually believe it because they were brainwashed with this data. So that's what I suggest may be happening here. The Democrats may have to meet her halfway, though, because, like I said, she's a media darling. She's commanding a lot of attention. She is getting the Democratic Party noticed again in the eyes of the media, the American people, just in a way that that Bernie did. So, okay, I just wanted to throw that out. So basically, there may be a halfway meeting point between the Democrats and how far to the left that Cortez is, AOC. Okay, Conjecture. I'm sorry, I finished my point.
Oh, I was saying when it comes to the news and how they report things, when it comes to Bernie and Cortez, they just kind of, a lot of them, excluding a few news stations, they just say, oh yeah, this person said this, and then they just kind of move on, almost as though it's either fact and they're just not going to challenge it. But, our president, we may not necessarily like or agree with him, but the news is being at least more honest towards the president than they are towards all of these new democratic socialists. Every time he says how much the wall is going to cost, they'll say, oh no, it's not going to cost this, it's actually going to cost this. And every mistake he makes or figure that he just throws out, they go out and they find an estimate, a rather good estimate, of a real figure. But with her, the mainstream media isn't even touching what the Green New Deal would do to our economy.
Right.
They just read off her advertising on it and move on.
Yep, they appeal to the audience, it seems like, when they're interviewing her on a completely emotional level, and that's it. There's no intellectual level to be reached when there's an interview with Cortez. Is that what you're basically saying? On the interviews with Cortez?
Oh, I'm just saying they just, whatever's with these democratic socialists, they're embracing them. Anyways, I will talk.
Okay. Well, I was going to actually add on to what you said, which is when Hillary was running for president, there were no hard questions asked by the mainstream media of Hillary. However, they went after Trump with a vengeance. Now, I'm not defending Trump, by saying, he was the victim. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there seems to be unequal treatment between the people running for the two parties, even though I do believe that they're basically very similar. They're not very different. We'll do that on another podcast, but today we wanted to focus on AOC. So, go ahead, American Man.
I, yes, I would like to go back and focus on this whole situation, what Cortez had to say with children,
Okay.
and how they're using this whole side of this whole thing for population control. Right now, statistics show that in America and in different countries like Japan and Europe, we have the lowest birth rates that they've ever seen, well, within the last 100 years. And so I believe this is only going to allow this to continue, and this is going to snowball, and it's going to go downhill. And that's my whole point on that.
Yeah, the demographics aren't pretty too. For instance, the country of Japan, the United States, and many other first world nations. That is very true. And that seems to be a tenet of being a first world nation, is your population tends to start leveling off. But
Right.
it does make sense, though, when you think about it. Basically two people get married, and they start their careers, and they put off having children. And they get so
Right.
wrapped up in their careers, basically that seems to be what happens here in America. I've seen it happen many, many times to many, many people. And in the case of America, I meant the fact people just aren't getting married anymore. Well, at least not in the numbers they were before. So they're
Right.
not even getting married anymore. But this is, as you say, a form of population control, scaring people not into having kids.
Right.
So, she's saying there is a scientific consensus that life will be hard for kids, basically due to climate change. Now, she's not saying man-made global warming or anything of that nature, just climate change. But you see, the fact of the matter is, and this is something I really, really wish a lot of people could actually look into rather than just listen to the sound bites in the media. The climate is always changing. We know this in our chat.
Yeah.
We have people that are engineers and scientists in our chat, and there's a consensus. The climate is constantly changing, and it has been since the beginning of time. Now, for people to actually suggest that it's a man-made problem, well, we didn't have the Industrial Revolution when the modern minimum happened, when we had the Little Ice Age. So was it man or the lack of carbon dioxide that caused this modern minimum? The answer actually is no. It was a solar cycle, a sun cycle, a lack of sunspots, a lack of solar ejecta into the solar system. That's what causes most of our weather is the sun, and on the earth it's volcanoes. And for them to continue saying no, 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 it's definitely due to fossil fuels. We've had very warm periods on this earth too. So, but
Yeah. Well, they're relying on the public of the United States' ignorance on all these subjects. America population as a whole is very uneducated now. I think more than they have ever been in the history of this country, and within the last 100 years. That's just my opinion, but that's what I see, and I see evidence of that every day.
I think you're
Not
right.
only that, now go ahead.
I think you're right because, well, once again, you know, I'm older than the millennials. I'm in Generation X. But I will tell you this: when I went to school, they taught us that the sun and volcanoes were the biggest drivers of weather on the planet. And so I know someone might say, well, they didn't have enough data back then to see that, SUVs were causing all the climate change. But the fact of the matter is it didn't, and it doesn't. And there is scientific evidence of this. Carbon dioxide follows a warming period. It never leads it. And that's what Al Gore lied about in An Inconvenient Truth. I won't get into that right now, but that's what he was fibbing about. He was talking about complications in the data, but he never described in his video what those complications were. The Ocasio-Cortez woman clearly did not do any research when she watched that video, and I'm assuming she did. She did not look into it. She simply believed Al Gore. Shame on you, Cortez. Shame on you. Al Gore's a liar. Oh, hang on. Maybe she believes Al Gore invented the internet. So,
I think so.
So go ahead. I'm sorry. I had to get that, that
No, that's
snide
fine. I
remark in.
just think that
Go ahead.
Cortez doesn't know how to add and subtract because of all the different ideas that she has involved in her new Green Deal. Doesn't add.
Yep.
It would cause such a catastrophe in our economy.
Yep.
That has been like never seen before. It would cause so many people to be wiped out. If medical insurance would be so far few and in between for anybody to have it except for the wealthy, in my opinion. And also, what people need to understand is that there are rhinos in the Republican Party that are going to back this Green Deal up, in my opinion, again. But the key word here isn't necessarily Democrat or Republican, it's progressive.
Yep.
The progressive campaign is what's trying to take down America. It is trying to stop the government system and the Constitution that we have. It's trying to restart a different Constitution under corporations.
Yeah, I agree. And once again, that goes back to the corporatism example I was giving earlier. But I'm telling you, I do have a gut feeling that the Democrats have a very loose cannon here, and they've probably got people trying to handle her right now. And they love the fact that she's personable, she's interviewable, and she has basically a way with the media where the media really loves to interview her. She seems to be very excited to be interviewed by the media. So they have someone that is now the public face of the Democratic Party, but they can't control the fact that she's brainwashed. So I think she'll probably simmer down in a little bit. I think the loose cannon here will be tempered at some point. But I'm curious who wrote this bill, because it almost seems like, just the way it was presented, that it was something she was involved in. And I don't think she wrote it. I don't think she had anything to do with it. In fact, I'm willing to bet, American Man, George Soros had something to do with writing that bill or funding those who wrote the bill. What do you think?
I was just going to say George Soros. You took the word right out of my mouth.
Yep. I don't think George Soros would give up on an opportunity like this. I mean, we're talking about the bill itself is a complete clampdown on an entire civilization.
Exactly, and that's it in a nutshell. It's a clamp down. This reminds me of the movie called Logan's Run. Remember that movie back in the 70s?
I do.
That's
Michael
what this
York.
reminds me of. Yes, I believe that this is going to open or try to open the door to bring the United States and the rest of the world into that same so-called utopia that they had in this movie. But people who are our age, or even younger generations who may have seen this movie, will understand that it's about controlling people.
Yep. And it's about keeping healthcare costs down by Literally, like for instance, in the movie Logan's Run, once you turned, I believe, I can't remember if it was 35. I think it might have been 35. Once you turn 35, you get to go to carousel, and
Right.
and then you get zapped, and they make you think that you're being reborn as a new baby. But the
Right.
fact is, what they were doing was they were controlling healthcare costs by killing everyone once they turned 35 years old. In this
Exactly.
in this particular instance, this isn't being reported as being in this bill, but that's already covered with Obamacare. So Obamacare has already
Yeah.
got euthanasia in it and abortion, and publicly funded abortion. So I don't know. It just seems like it's almost like it's a complementary bill to Obamacare. I mean, it's a total clampdown.
Exactly.
Yep. And it just it literally it just trods on the freedoms of American people in so many ways. We don't have personal property rights here in America anymore. You have to
Not
pay taxes
anymore.
on your property every year, and if you don't pay your taxes, they will come take your property away, even if it's paid for. Um,
Right.
so I don't know.
And
Go ahead.
I'd like the listeners to understand something, and I can't say this enough or express this enough. This started here in California last year when Jerry Brown passed SB 100. And real quick, if you don't mind, I'd like to explain what that is.
Go for it.
Real fast, Jerry Brown passed a law stating that anybody who owns a home that was made on such and such a date, the homes have to be modernized. They're going to be sending people out in groups of two, which is against the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment. And they're going to be inspecting your home. If you're ignorant enough to open up the door and allow them to come in, they're going to take notes. They have forms already printed out. They're made for this. They do inspections. You're going to have to put new windows, doors, sliding glass doors, maybe some plumbing or electricity in, and you're going to have to get solar energy put in your home. And if you don't do these things and you don't meet these requirements that Jerry Brown has implemented in the law in the state of California, you will be fined and penalized till eventually you will lose your home. Period. And every construction site from here on now of 2019, depending where it is and how much the structure is being built, a lot of these new apartments that are being built in California do not have gas in them. They have electrical stoves, electrical heaters, and you're not allowed to barbecue on the terrace or the balcony of your apartment. And so this is the new beginning of that Orwellian, utopian lifestyle that they're trying to push upon the American people.
Yep. And let me come up with something even more fundamental. How much greenhouse gases, just trillions of tons of greenhouse gases while they're working on, destroying structures and rebuilding them. Um,
Right.
while they're building, electric cars and taking away people's, gasoline cars, or diesel, internal
Yes.
combustion engine. I mean, how much, how many greenhouse gases will they put in the atmosphere actually doing that? But at the same time, I mean, I brought that in as to actually kind of round it out just a little bit, just to show you how ridiculous this is. We're talking about, Conjecture did the numbers on this, but we're talking about literally remaking the United States of America house by house, building by building, infrastructure, plumbing. I mean, we're talking everything, and including the cars.
Right.
That's what this so-called Green New Deal is. And I
Right.
think people don't understand it yet. I'm not one of she presents it as a utopia, a wonderful place to be, but I think that it would be absolutely devastating to the economy. Here's my guess. Here's my guess going forward. My guess is this bill was so huge, so all-encompassing, and so freedom destroying, and they'll let that sink in to the people that this was a bad bill, and then they'll present another one a year later that'll have only about, two-thirds of that kind of thing. And then they'll present another, and that'll get trumped on. And then they'll do another one a year later with only about one-third of the cost and one-third of the infrastructure changes and you know, that's it. Just seems it's like a trial balloon. They're literally giving you the worst case scenario, so it doesn't seem so bad when they strip it down to 1/3 of its original vision.
Sounds about right to me. But why aren't they taking any money? And I don't know if this is relevant to this issue or not, but I got to say this. Why aren't they taking any of the money they have now and spending it on infrastructure now? Look at the condition of our bridges and our roads now.
That's a
They're
very, very
falling
good
apart.
point. Very good point. And in fact, that's something Trump promised to do. It's one of his failed campaign promises, which was working on the United States infrastructure. And by the way,
Right.
I will point out Trump's failings. I hope that people understand that I'm trying to be objective on this sort of thing. I am a libertarian, um, but Trump has failed us in many ways, and he's trying very hard not to fail on the wall, which was one of his campaign promises. Good, bad, or indifferent, it looks like that one may actually be starting to go through. He failed on everything else, all the other, well, except for he in fact, I don't want to make this about Trump right now, so let me skip that.
Right.
But I think we pretty much covered a broad stroke of this Green New Deal. Conjecture, are you still with us? Okay, we may have lost conjecture here. But I think we got a good broad stroke here and kind of a broad view of this Green New Deal and what it encompasses. The cost is astronomical. I mean, to even, it's just weird because 10 years ago, $1 trillion was a lot of money. And it seems like it's not anymore. Between
No.
51 and 93 trillion, um, it's a bit much. It's a bit
And
much.
where are we at right now? Where are we at in the deficit right now?
In the deficit, I'll bring it up right now in the U.S. debt clock. It's 22 trillion. It's 20. We're going up pretty quick. 22 trillion, 58 billion.
And yet this new Green Deal is going to cost how much every year?
Somewhere right around 6 trillion a year.
See?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very interesting that they even thought to propose something like this.
Yep.
To throw something that stinky at the American people to see what their opinion was. But that's why I think it was a trial balloon. I still think it was a trial
Right.
balloon. And
Well, I
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that they're probably going to still pass something like this. And here's another projection I have based on the type of activity we see happening within the Democratic Party. If we have a recession, and by the way, that's very likely between now and 2020. And once again, I think I've said in earlier podcasts that everyone's listened to me on that, or everyone who has listened to me on that, should be watching the bond market. The bond market is constantly in a state of literally inverting. And that's exactly the telltale sign of a recession. There are many more, but that's the obvious one. Italy is already officially in a recession, which could take down the EU because they have so many bonds owned by other countries within the EU. If the euro goes down, it will be the first, basically the first domino to fall to take down the world economy. The dollar will probably be the last one standing. However, I do think that we will probably go through some economic hard times in the next 2 years. And if we do in 2020, if this happens in 2020, we'll get someone like Bernie Sanders in office. I think it's pretty much a guaranteed thing. He'll promise the world to everyone after they've been through a little bit of pain during the recession. And
Yeah. I believe it's population modification, meaning they're going to modify the circumstances to prep people to be more open-minded to receive the garbage they're going to shovel down our throats.
yep, well, it's basically up to people to start paying attention, start doing a little
Yes.
bit more research. Do not listen to the mainstream media. I mean, if you want to incorporate that as part of the information you take in, then so be it. But if that's your sole source of information is the mainstream, you're in trouble because
Big trouble.
there's a lot more lies than there are truth in the mainstream media. And I man, we could actually do probably about a 5-hour podcast on that, just for media stories, basically since Clinton went in office. I could do 5 hours of
Right.
podcasts on that because they lied about a lot of things. And we could even go into, you know, you know, the Jussie Smollett story, the fact that the media backed up his story and everything. But that is a symptom of the condition we're dealing with here with American politics too. We're not doing our due diligence, folks. People listen to this stuff and they believe it. We need to start doing our research. We need to start, implementing, a way to actually get out of debt. We're not even doing that right now.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are linked in that regard. Ocasio-Cortez is a
Mind if
symptom.
I
Go ahead, Conjecture. Welcome
Hey,
back.
conjecture.
I have a note about this. The last, Obama, when he was in office, he was campaigning about the whole. I mean, when when he was a senator, he was voting against increasing the debt ceiling, and the Democrats going, rather far back, even Reagan's day. They always talked about, you can't be running these giant deficits. You need to find some other way to pay for everything. And then Obama got into office. And, every State of the Union he gave, he was saying we need to do something about the deficit. Until 2013, that was the last State of the Union he gave in which the deficit ever came up again.
Yeah. Well, I'll even bring up something else to it.
It's like the game of the little cakewalk, where you just don't want to be the one in office when this thing goes on.
Yep, I agree. That's the whole idea with kicking the can down the road, which we've been doing literally since Reagan. Since Reagan, the can has been kicked and kicked and kicked. But I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what you just said about when Obama was running and campaigning for president of the United States. George Bush had raised the debt under his watch. I'm sorry, it wasn't George Bush, but under his watch, the debt went up $4 trillion. And the debt was officially at $10 trillion. Obama said it was unpatriotic and un-American to continue raising the debt. Campaigned on this. When he goes into office under his watch, the debt doubled from 10 to 20 trillion. Did anyone in the media ever ask him to go back and revisit his statements towards Bush? The answer is no. They never did. They give the Democrats a pass. Generally, they give all Democrats a pass. But, Conjecture, we were talking a little bit more about how the media, you were talking about this, they give her a pass, don't they? They don't ask her hard questions. They don't ask her for details on the Green New Deal, do they?
Not that I can see. The only people who are attacking her are people who are not necessarily mainstream.
Those are people that have actually read the bill. That's it. And that happens to be in the alternative media. In the mainstream media is much like, our current state of politics in the United States. No one reads anything anymore.
Speaking of, did you know that her and Bernie are big proponents of what is called modern monetary theory?
No, I didn't. Go ahead and tell us about that, Conjecture.
Essentially, it's I can't remember, it was some guy who was heavily in finance, and he came out with this, what he thought was a series of these revelations. He thought, well, the government, you can't be thinking of the government like it's, it's on a budget that's just some ancient thing from when we were on a gold standard. I think that the ultimate end, or the ultimate limit to how much the government can spend, has everything just to do with how much inflation are we willing to accept.
Yep. And it looks
That's
to me,
what they think the constraints are. Just start running the printing press.
Yep. And I'll tell you what. I mean, once again, to actually elaborate on what you're saying, no one seems to be concerned about the debt anymore. It doesn't matter what party. In fact,
Right.
the last person who talked about the debt that was running for president, quite frankly, was Ron Paul in 2012. I don't think anyone was talking about the debt in the 2016 presidential election cycle. unless I'm very much mistaken. I don't think Rand talked about the debt. No one talked about, shrinking the size of government. It's just we just that isn't encompassed within the platform of the Republican Party anymore. At least if it is, they
At
don't
this
talk
point
about
in
it.
time, I think the
Well,
goal of all of these politicians in office is to get as much free stuff from the government for them and their friends, as much as they absolutely can possibly squeeze out of the government before this thing blows up.
I
They'll hold off on some constraint where they think is a safe level for them to hold it, and then they want to pass that off to the next party so that it blows up in their faces. And it looks like it's going to blow up on the watch of the Republicans. But if it somehow miraculously doesn't, and we start seeing reverse of the yield curve inversion, and maybe the Fed starts lowering rates instead of raising rates, I mean, we might see it under the Democrats, but the Fed is they're basically playing with political favorites. They should have been raising rates back in 2014.
Yep,
They
I
waited
agree.
until after the president got elected.
That's correct. They waited until Trump was elected. I'm sorry, until Obama was leaving office. It was December, right before Trump went in, is when they first started implementing the increases in the interest rates. You are correct, Conjecture. And by the way, that is a very astute assessment, and I agree with you 100% on everything you had just said. Um, and it's actually, honest to God, it's a travesty that they've let it go this far. But I'll tell you what, though, they are slicing up that pie so thin between themselves up in Washington. People don't get it. They absolutely don't get it. They think their congressman and the representative is there to serve them and to do good, to actually represent the constituents and what they want. No, they're there to get their tiny sliver of the pie. That is correct. I agree.
oh yeah. Yep. Couldn't agree more, gentlemen. I really could not agree more with you.
Okay, I'll tell you what, if unless anyone has some final thoughts they wanted to add, I figured I'd go ahead and wrap up the podcast. Conjecture, is there
One
anything
more
else?
quick
Oh, go
thought.
ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say that anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, you need to realize something. In a nutshell, this is to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to enslave the American people.
Yep, I
And
agree.
that's all I wanted to add.
Yep, I agree, because that's exactly what it does. That's what it effectively does, doesn't it? It takes away choice. It destroys competition. It makes the
Right.
government the only business on the block, doesn't it?
Exactly.
So basically the government would have 100% control of the GDP, and that's communism. I mean, there's other
Right.
tenets to communism, yes, but I mean, when the government controls all facets of the economy, that's officially communism or totalitarianism. I mean, take your pick. Both of them are horrible, structures. Conjecture, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, make sure you have plenty of food and other resources when the debt bubble finally pops.
That's a good idea. Have yourself some precious
Oh,
metals, some crypto, some food. Have a plan. Have a plan, and make sure your family is all basically synced up on that plan. That's a good idea. Thank you, Conjecture.
I mean, it might not go off in this next recession, it might not go off in the following recession, but when this thing finally pops, you want to be prepared. If you're caught flat footed, you're.
Yeah. Yep.
God help us.
Yep. Yep. Indeed, God help us all. But I'd
Amen.
like to go ahead and wrap this up and say thank you very much for listening to the podcast today. We are Truth, Money, and Freedom. We're on Discord. And in the description section down below, there's a link to join us on Discord. You may have missed out on this podcast, but you haven't missed out on the conversation. We talk about these kinds of things every day in our Discord server. Thank you very much for spending just, looks like more than a few minutes with us today, but hopefully it gave you a little bit of insight as to what we've been talking about as far as AOC and the Green New Deal is. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day.